when you look at a chain that hasn't launched yet, the foundation delegation basically makes or breaks the chain. Because if there is not like a correct genesis allocation, then immediately when you launch the chain, someone will be able to attack it, right? I think the app chain thesis will prove to be correct, but I don't think it's correct at this moment in time.
Welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Bare Metal Podcast. I'm here with Ertemann of Lavender.Five. Welcome, Gijs.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Great, so let's get started right away. How did Lavender.Five get into validation, and what was your very first chain?
Oh, that's a good question. I've joined relatively recently, or I joined I think a year ago first as like a bit of an ambassador. I worked a lot with Schultze and James. Schultze is the founder of Lavender.Five, and James is our other colleague. So I joined a little bit later when there were already more chains coming, but I think the first chain actually was Secret. That's where it's not really the first chain they learned to validate on, but it's one of the first chains where they got to mainnet and got to be in the active set and start validating for the network. But it very soon grow, and currently we're on 25 plus Cosmos networks and also validating for chains like Aptos and Near and some other proof of stake networks outside of the Cosmos ecosystem.
You guys validate in other ecosystems. Can you expand on that a little bit? Where are you guys outside of Cosmos?
Yeah, so we run most of our validators run in the Cosmos ecosystem, but we also run one for Near. We have done that for a long time. Sometimes been out of the set, sometimes been in the set. Currently, we're luckily in the active set again. But then we run a validator for Aptos on mainnet already. Where we support their development. I think it's crazy to see how many applications have come to that chain in such little time. So it's just incredible to see how they build software there with, I don't know, I guess a different mindset or a different way to bring things to mainnet. And besides that, we are exploring a lot of chains we think are interesting, but most of them are still on testnet, because I think in general, a lot of proof of stake chains are not always accessible. Something like Ethereum or Avalanche, you would have to have an X amount of tokens to sort of stake yourself. So you're basically having a node purely for yourself, while in the Cosmos ecosystem, of course, you have a node for other people to be able to stake to you, like it's delegated proof of stake. But a lot more delegated proof of stake or just general like you don't have to lock up to have a node. A lot more of those networks are coming in. So I think we're like more than 5 testnets at the minimum, if I can think of it right now, who are outside of the Cosmos ecosystem, or will also hopefully validate for our mainnet. But those things are always in flux, of course.
So you've touched on this role of validators, right, in the ecosystem, and one of them is help the chain get to mainnet, right? So my question would be, how do you get into contact with new projects? How do you find these candidates where you go run testnets? Is there, like, do you guys connect on Twitter randomly, or do you meet them at conferences? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I wish there was a single answer as to, there is this I don't know, group where you just have to be in and you will know every testnet or every mainnet that's coming, but sadly that is not the case. So sometimes it's people that approach us. So we have had certain chains say, hey, we've seen your work on the Cosmos Hub, or we're looking for relayers for a testnet. Are you able to join our testnet and help us out? 9 out of 10 times we say yes, we're happy to come in and join. Other times it's one of us 3 finding a project we think is interesting. So all 3 of us are relatively interested in the privacy space. So we're looking at projects outside of the Cosmos ecosystem, for example, which are building privacy cornerstone infrastructure or stuff like that, which we think is interesting. And then we just reach out, see if we can join a testnet or help out in that way. And then I think events, what you mentioned, is maybe the last place where we meet people. I think most of it is either people reach out or you find them on Twitter, or a delegator of us says, "Hey, you're not on this chain," or "I know this chain is going to launch. I really like their product. Can you check it out? Will you also be there?" I always think that's maybe the coolest thing to have happen, is when someone who's not part of the team reaches out and say, "Hey, I would really like for you guys to be able to be on that chain and help them out, and see if we can delegate to you when the chain goes live." Um, that sort of shows like this stamp of confidence by the community as well, right? That I guess it's part of our vetting process. Maybe you can't just say yes to every chain or yes to every testnet. You have to sort of pick and choose your battles. We're with only that many people and that much infrastructure, we can't run every single chain. Would be awesome if we could, but I don't think that's a possibility. So when a community member reaches out, it gets a little bit easier, because then at least there is like a significant amount of people that are interested to see you there, or help out, and they like the product.
Right. You seem to be a very interested in efficiency. I think that's an interesting perspective that I haven't sort of discussed on this podcast before, and it absolutely makes sense, right? That's where a lot of the frustration and stuff comes in, when you have to spend all this time on stuff that you feel is unproductive. But I'm also curious, a big part, or I guess in my view, a big part of how a validator interacts with a chain is also governed by what's called the foundation delegation program, right? So when you are spinning up a new chain, when somebody's spinning up a new chain and you guys are participating in validation, there's this whole stage where the foundation has to decide, okay, we're going to delegate to some people. Do you feel that's done efficiently these days? Do you think it makes sense? It's well structured? What are your thoughts on foundation delegation programs? Sort of give me the good, the bad, and the ugly.
It's it is super dependent on which foundation, which chain, which state of the chain. I mean, when you look at a chain that hasn't launched yet, the foundation delegation basically makes or breaks the chain. Because if there is not like a correct genesis allocation, then immediately when you launch the chain, someone will be able to attack it, right? So when you launch a chain, foundation delegations, or the admin delegations, or whatever you want to call it, are very important. But also when your chain matures, you get into situations where certain validators are getting delegations, and might not do anything for the protocol. And that doesn't mean that they're particularly bad actors. They're just simply not overly good actors, if that makes sense. And I guess then you come into a whole different discussion where, what is the role of a validator? And I think nobody knows what that is. Some people attract a lot of roles and say, we are the guardian of the community, or we have to validate the codes, or like everyone has their own meaning there. But some people go as far as saying a validator doesn't have to do anything. The only thing they have to do is run the chain. So if they have one single node with 95% uptime, then by definition they're doing their job, so we shouldn't complain.
Do you think that's worth a foundation delegation? Would it make sense to you to delegate to a validator like that? Or like in my view, the foundation is responsible for developing the chain ecosystem, right? And part of that, in my view again, is they should efficiently allocate that capital that they have at their disposal to maximally support their ecosystem and grow it. So I get what you're saying. Validators at the bare minimum, they have to run a solid node. But how does that connect back to foundation delegations? Should there be some criteria? Should there be some structure, some agreements that are then checked? Is this happening? Is this not happening? Have you guys ever said, okay, you know what, we'll run an IBC relayer, and then does that ever get checked out? Like, are you guys actually running it?
Yeah, so I think a validator like that shouldn't get a foundation delegation. And that's not because they're not doing their job, but that's because I think those delegations are a form of payment. So the foundation or the core development organization or whoever has these tokens sort of states, because you're providing additional service, or because you are developing on our network, or because you are providing liquidity, or 1,000 other reasons, we think you deserve some extra pay, and here is that pay. And that's how at least how I and how we see these foundation delegations, is that we provide a lot of these services anyway. It's not like we cancel our services if we don't get a foundation delegation, but it does help us provide these services, because if we have to do it simply from our validator income, then it's not sustainable for a chain. Maybe if they are at like 300, 500 million market cap, then it gets closer. But like 9 out of 10 Cosmos chains, we can't provide these services without getting a foundation delegation, or at least we will provide them, but we can't sustain them long term, simply from the income from a delegator. And I think that is sort of where these delegations come in, and that's also the consequence. So if foundations or core development organizations mishandle the delegation of these tokens, then they lose out on people that providing additional services. So if you don't delegate to the correct people, then at a certain point they either might quit their extra services, or stop developing, or might even leave the chain. So it's a way to keep good actors and people with a lot of value add inside of your ecosystem. So it's a tool. I think it's more so a tool for the development organizations than it should be a reliance for validators. So it's not something we should all rely on, but it's something a chain can use to make sure that they have all the core infrastructure and core stuff. And for some chains, it's not even important. I mean, if you run a very, maybe not even centralized, but let's say you run a sovereign app chain and you require very specific hardware to run like nodes, or you say, we have money enough, we can run our own nodes, we don't need any of the validators or any external party to provide API nodes, then you also don't need to delegate for that, right? So you can reserve those delegations either for yourself, or you can delegate to developers instead. And I guess that's a choice every chain makes on their own. Yeah, so that's how I see them, at least. And then what you say, what's the bad stuff of foundation delegations? Well, some chains to say, hey, if you relay all of these chains, and if you do this and this, and maybe spin up an extra 2 or 3 nodes, we will make a foundation delegation. And then you do that, and they never come with it. And then at a certain point, you just have to quit. I mean, there's no.
Is that a matter of delay, or do they just not hold to the promise? I mean,
No, it just happens that they provide, like, you make sort of it's all spoken deals, right? Or it's all in text, but no one ever signs a contract about these things, because it's not that high value. It's not that important. It's just, let's say we already run a relayer for like 5 of the channels, or we already run a public node, but it is 2 or 3 nodes and not 6 or 7. And they say, hey, we need some extra people. Can you do this? And we'll up your foundation delegation, or we will start delegating to you. Then even if you do that, sometimes the delegation doesn't happen in the end. And then you can complain one time, or you can ask another time, but we're not going to ask 5, 6 times to get that done. At a certain point, it's just, okay, then we'll just move back to our previous situation, or we'll support only half of it, or we'll do what costs we can bear. So I guess the bad thing of it is that it's just sometimes it's poorly handled, and that's not. It's also not an easy task. Especially not if you're the Interchain Foundation and you have to do it for a 3 million market, or like a 3 billion market cap chain, like Atom. But yeah, for very centralized chains, the foundation delegations just don't happen in the end, and I think that's sad. Not because you really need the money, but more so because they make a promise and then it doesn't happen.
Honestly, that is surprising. Yeah, okay, let's hope so, number one. But that is surprising. Like, I did not think a foundation can sort of survive that sort of, handling. Like, the reputation's got to be tarnished somehow if they do that a few times. But on the subject of leaving chains, which you alluded to just a little bit back. Have you guys left any chains? And can you explain reasoning or talk about why?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have left 5 chains during the bear market. Um, and I think part of this is our maybe we were maybe too willing to jump on every chain. And I think that's something we've learned probably over the past years, that you have to, even though you try to vet a project, vet a team, see if they're capable, if they're going to deliver products, sometimes it's just simply not a good decision to launch yet another chain, but guide them towards making a decision like, we will deploy on a permissionless smart contract chain first, and we'll do an ICS chain after. Um, so that there have been some like high APR startup inflation product is coming later type of chains. We have run some of those, not all of those. Um, and I do think it's a good decision to leave those behind at the moment. If development stagnates, if it's clear that the team is um, not getting somewhere, but if development is still ongoing and commits are keeping in, then even though there might not be a product at this time, I do think it's maybe premature to leave the chain. Sometimes it's good to test things in production just to get your chain running and do it. I mean, you can stay on testnet forever, but in the end, running a mainnet chain will bootstrap your product, bootstrap your liquidity, disperse your tokens. It also has certain value. So I do think some validators are maybe pushing it to the extreme where they say, we're leaving everything that doesn't have a product when it launches. And that's a fair assessment if they feel that way, but I do think there is a value in launching your chain first, and stuff comes after that. It's more so maybe the liquidity incentives that are a problem in the eyes of some people, which I get. But anyway, to come back to, yeah, why do you leave or how do you do that? Yeah, if it just doesn't, if we support builders, that's often what we say. So we don't only support chains, but we support people that constantly keep improving and making things. And if that building just stops, then you have to be realistic and say, we can no longer support this. Or if you also have to be realistic about your costs. And I think some validators are very open about that, some are not. But the reality is that it's partly you do it because you like the ecosystem and because you agree with a lot of people and want to see projects grow, but it's also a business that has to keep the lights on, and some people have colleagues they have to pay, or like employees they have to pay, and if that comes to a point where a chain is just hemorrhaging money and it's not developing too much, then maybe you have to make the choice to remove yourself from the set. And I do think, I wouldn't say we have to applaud it, but I think that's a fair choice. If someone has to say, okay, I can't support this no longer because I simply don't have the money, then that's the case. I mean, you can't force them to stay on if they don't have the money to have the hardware and support the chain. And that's simply the case. Some chains, which are very, very small, launch with 150 active validators, and that's maybe a problem of the bull market where people are like, yeah, I can launch with whatever amount of validators I have, doesn't matter, they will be filled up anyway. But some chains are just left with active sets with, I don't know, 10 influencers who have 2 nodes each, and other whitelisted, like white label validators and NFT projects, and they're all losing money because the token isn't worth a lot. And then you just get into a situation where I don't think you can sustain it. So yes, decentralization is important, but it's also very much, it's not the number of validators that creates that, it's the disbursement of the tokens. So maybe having a smaller set with like 50 or 60 active validators, but a good token decentralization can be a lot more beneficial than having 150 active validators where the last 50 are just losing €100 a month or $100 a month because they're running hardware. And all those tokens need to be sold, because if they don't sell, by definition, they cannot pay their hardware. So yeah, I don't know. I think there are optimizations to be made there by chains, but I've not seen anyone reduce their active set yet.
So you've touched on a topic that's important. That's the economics of blockchains and of validators. And obviously, Cosmos will have to somehow get to grips with these thesis of sovereign chains versus the economic costs of sovereign chains. And I mean, there's one approach that the Cosmos Hub is developing now, which is ICS, right? Interchain security, where the hub can lease out security to chains. What do you think about that? How's that going to affect the validator business? And do you think there's space for sovereign chains in the future? Are you expecting lots of new sovereign chains to come up versus sort of consumer chains, as they're called, using ICS security?
I think the app chain thesis will prove to be correct, but I don't think it's correct at this moment in time. And that may sound weird from a validator on a lot of these chains, but I do think now that the bear market has come in and people are realizing the amount of costs that come with with having their own sovereign chain, you get into situations where they would have probably been better off as a smart contract first and then as an ICS chain later on. But maybe that has also to do with the fact that ICS hasn't launched yet. It's not like, okay, we want it to be core to our protocol, so we don't want to do smart contracts. Then you're sort of stuck in a situation where you have to launch your own chain, right? And that, I guess that's no longer the case anymore. So I do think the app chain thesis makes sense, that you have your own, you can set your own block time, you can set your own parameters, you can integrate things within the SDK that are like as modules, which are a lot closer to people when they develop on your blockchain. And you can have all of these parameters yourself, how much validators you want and stuff like that. But there's just not enough funding or not enough money, I guess, in the space right now to sort of sustain that. So ICS is, I guess, the bridge, right? It's like, what if we want all of these things, but we don't have the money to completely support that, or we can't inflate our token that much to support it? What can we do? No, you can launch an ICS chain. But I think that a concept that it is discussed, but maybe not enough, is that what actually happens, in my opinion at least, is that instead of the blockchain, so the consumer's chain incurring those costs, yes, they have to do some inflation, but they don't have to pay an entire validator set. Instead of them sort of incurring those costs, they put those costs on the validators of the main chain, of the Cosmos hub, I guess, in this case. So you get into a situation where, let's say, like we just said, right, the bottom of the Atom set makes 3K a year in USD at the moment. A validator, like a validator node and a backup is like $150 a month if you rent a server. The upfront costs of your own computer would be different, but you can assume it's like $150 a month. So let's say it's $1,500 a year to sustain your hardware, basically. You're like, it's a single node and a backup, or like a single node and a sentry, or so you don't, or like dgen Horcrux, which is you're running a remote signer on one node. So you're having 3 remote signers, but they're all on the same physical machine, like on the same machine. That's also a possibility. But anyway, like, let's say you have a simple setup and you do something like that. Then you spend like $1,500 a year. Now, well, if you so what I was going to say is, what you can do basically is you can run one additional chain and also spend $1,500, and after that you don't have any money anymore, right? So if you run one extra ICS chain with the same hardware setup as you do on the Cosmos Hub, you double your costs. But do you also double your income? You don't really. You maybe get some tokens from these ICS chains, but never enough. So every chain that launches on the hub doesn't only complicate your setup. I mean, not every validator is able to run 10 different machines and always be awake to fix one of those 10 machines. But but you're also complicating your economic structure. Every time another node comes in, you have to. It's not really linear, right? Because as soon as you get more machines, you can share nodes across the machines and it becomes easier. You don't have to have a backup for every single machine. So yes, there's sort of an economy of scale, but simply put, launching an ICS chain will incur costs to validators of the main chain. And I do think that's feasible to some extent, but let's say Atom governance is willing to just accept every single chain that's coming in, and this chain comes in and they say, yeah, we'll have 15% token inflation, but it ends up that either their token is worth zero or like very little, or they just cut off inflation, because the governance of this ICS chain is actually dependent on the holders of those tokens and not of the Atom holders. So the Atom holders can't decide what the inflation is going to be of this consumer chain. So if this consumer chain decides to have zero inflation and doesn't give any value to any of the people who are validating the hub, then a hub validator is forced to deploy another machine, but they don't get anything back. And I guess that's the current state of ICS: is you're forced to run another machine for every single chain that comes up, another node for every single chain that comes in, because if you don't, you get slashed, and you don't get slashed on the consumer chain, or you get slashed on the hub. So if you don't basically agree with what governance is saying and deploy your node, you're getting slashed on the hub. So I think we'll see maybe a future where if like 3 or 4 ICS chains deploy within this bear market, that suddenly a lot of people in the active set on the hub just simply can't support it. Not only economically, but also like they don't have enough technical capabilities to support 4 different servers with the monitoring that is required and the key management that's required to basically fix that. So it's ICS has a centralizing impact, I guess, on the hub, and we have yet to see how big that impact is. But I think it's it's interesting to know how that will work, and that impact will only be bigger the smaller the chains is. So let's say Juno will launch an ICS chain, like I don't know, Juno 2 will launch or whatever, or Joe chain will be a consumer chain of Juno. Juno has an even smaller market cap, right? So validators make even less. So them having to run another machine is even more impactful. So this centralizing force is going to be, I don't know. I'm keen to see how it will happen. I think it's the first time a feature is coming to the hub where validators and infrastructure providers are maybe less excited than the community is. Often it's the other way around, where it's like, oh my god, I can use RZ to do this, and that's going to be awesome. And then all the like users are like, I don't care. And now it's the other way around. The consumers are like, we'll get staking rewards of 10 different chains, and we are just in the back like, how are we gonna run 10 different chains? Like,
so one of the predictions would be that there's likely like a hard cap of how many chains can actually run on, as consumer chains on the hub under the current conditions. I guess that's one of the conclusions of what you're saying.
Yeah, and I think like the other way around is that you would say, okay, but every time a chain launches, more value accrues to Atom, so Atom value will increase, and that will pick up like the economic differences, sort of. But I'm not an economist, and I don't know if that's going to be the reality. But let's say the token value remains the same, then this is what I see, and I can't expect where the token value will go. It's dependent on so much, of course. But then I still think the sort of technical centralization still exists. So it will become harder for someone in their bedroom to launch a validator node on the Cosmos Hub, because spinning up a validator node for the Cosmos Hub means you will spin up a validator node for maybe 5 more chains.
So it's increasing barriers to entry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's increasing complexity of validator nodes. Yeah.
You mentioned inflation-free blockchains. So there are a few blockchains that have close to zero inflation. Are you guys validating any of those? And
what
are your thoughts around the economy of that?
Yeah, so I don't have an answer here actually. I think it's just an interesting concept that, and it all comes back to payment of validators. Do they actually deserve payment? Like it's a whole. Um, I, I don't have a very strict opinion on that or like a set opinion on that, but I think it's something people don't know yet. But anyway, the reality is that if there's no chain inflation, uh, then validators get very little income. And for someone who is only staking their tokens, that might not be important, right? Because me staking my tokens, if I know I get like, for example, Kujira has like, I think a 2.2% yield or something. But you know that there is no native inflation. So maybe there is inflation from like vesting schedules with VCs or whatever, but there is no native inflation. So you know your true yield. Your true yield is the same 2.2% as that you yield on as that you're getting. While on Atom, for example, I think inflation is 15%, if I'm correct, and then the APR is like 22. So your real yield is like between 5 and 6%, I think, if you calculate it out. I'm not exactly sure what exact math is there, but it's something like that. So the true yield between Kujira and Atom isn't that big of a difference. Like if you discount inflation away from the Atom yield, then you're not earning that much more in like true ownership of the protocol than you're doing for Kujira. But the difference is that all of those 22% of inflation, the commission that goes over that goes to the validators. While for Kujira, there's only a commission over this 2%. So validators make basically nothing. And I'm just questioning how long that's sustainable. I think Kujira is an awesome protocol. Let's put it like that. I think their product is sick. They developed a very cool product. They have shipped very fast, and I think they are a good competition and a welcome addition to the Cosmos ecosystem. And I think their economics, will have people think about a lot of different things. But it is a sort of concerning, like, tail risk, I guess you could call it, where it's like, what if the hype dies down and people are not willing to just spend, because that's the deal, right? You're spending money on this chain without getting anything back. How long will people do that? I don't know. Maybe very long, maybe not. The equation probably changes when there is more when there's more yield. So when the revenue increases of the chain, or maybe the solution is just for validators to charge a higher commission on chains where there is no inflation. But we sort of got accustomed to the 5%, right, or the 10%. So what if we charge 20 or 30%? Then what will people do? They will probably delegate somewhere else. So,
Right.
I don't know. I think it's an interesting
Experiment.
new thing, and it also plays into the entire ICS. Yeah, it's an interesting experiment, and I think it also plays into the ICS like complications I just stated. Right? What if all ICS chains have zero inflation? You're basically you're just benefiting off ICS, but the hop validators get screwed. So I guess there's like how that works, I don't know, but it's this bear market will probably prove that out for the next year or so, see if it's sustainable. But yeah, I can see more validators leave certain chains, or maybe even leave the hop set simply because they can't support it.
Right.
And I hope we're not one of them.
I have one comment to the yeah, let's hope not. I have one comment to the staking rewards on Atom. I think those are computed from the sort of the minting module mints the tokens, and then the staking rewards. So there's an inflation, but then the staking rewards are computed also from the proportion of staked tokens. So those get redistributed. So they also depend on how much is staked. So I'm wondering. I don't think the Cosmos Hub is an appreciable amount of yield from actual fees. I think that's going to be really negligible, and this is more like a relationship between the amount of stake tokens and the minting module. But let's check that out.
Yeah. What I meant What I meant with real yield is sort of the difference between inflation and what you get. So it's not really the transaction fees. I more so mean as in, like, let's say I delegate and I know that I have 15% inflation and I earn 22% minus the commission, then what do I have left over? It's like 6% a
Right.
year in sort of true extra ownership of the protocol. So it's not really transaction fees, but it's more like the real yield, I guess.
The staking reward.
Yeah, but often people just see a high number and they're like, "Oh, high APR, this is going to be great," and then they forget that there's also like 60% inflation and they're actually earning nothing or less than inflation.
Yeah, that's always a good point. And yeah, I guess we've touched a lot of topics. So thanks very much for your time talking to us on the Bare Metal podcast, and hope to see you here again some point.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Always open to have another conversation. Maybe I can ask you one last question. Like, are you looking forward to ICS? Do you think it's going to be great, or like, what's your opinion here?
I'm interested to see what the economics around that look like. So I concur with you on that one. But I'm also more concerned about the centralization here, where one set of validators is sort of running many chains. And again, like, this goes back to what is the hard cap? Is there a cap on how many chains can even be run? So maybe it's a non-problem because you can't run more than, let's say 5, 10. I don't understand how the economics are here, but if there is a hard cap, I'm less concerned. If there isn't, and you have this one set of validators running tens of chains, I'm not sure I'm very comfortable with that construction. So that would be my take on ICS, and we'll see how that develops and if there'll be new versions of the product. So we'll see where that goes. Thank you for that question.
Yeah, I think everyone is sort of interested in the second version, right, where you can choose to only have some of your security from ICS and can pick and choose the specific validators. I mean, that's going to be an beyond interesting concept, which people have not yet figured out, and it also negates, I guess, sort of the risks I talked about, with like the centralization risks and stuff like that. But anyway, I guess the hard cap comes from the governance, right? I assume Atom governance isn't gonna vote yes on 10 different chains, but if they will, then I don't know. Maybe we hope they don't, but we'll see. I'm at least excited. I think it's cool. It's a very cool feature, and it will bring Atom to feature parity with Polkadot. So that's going to be cool as well.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we can conclude today's podcast. So thanks very much, and good luck in all your validation work.
Yeah, we'll do. Thank you.